Celtic Stuff Live.
Welcome to Celtic Stuff Live on the CLNS Media Network, the leading online provider of audio and video coverage for the Boston Celtics. I'm your host, Justin Poulin. Joining me now, John Duke, and we're recording this on the 10th, the decade anniversary of the Boston Celtics trading for Kevin Garnett. It was a special time for us, John. I know we have recounted or whatever the word is. We've looked back and right. We've looked back. There we go. I bet recanted is take it back.
Rekindled?
Recounted is what happens when the voting machine doesn't work. But we've looked back many times in the past and talked about what a special day that was. And I remember where I was. I know you remember where you were. And neither of us was in a position to really be recording a podcast. However, we found a way to do it, and very similar to, I guess, our vacations earlier this month, you just make it work, and you keep the show going. But I remember how exciting it was, and obviously you've played some clips on Twitter, you know, I remember finding out about you, which with every passing year becomes more and more relevant. It was just so funny when it was actually happening, you're like, oh yeah, like pre-nostalgia. But now here we are 10 years later, it's like legit nostalgia.
You know, yeah, it was like, I think the thing about the whole, that day, you know, was we kind of knew things were coming. And I mean, I think first of all, I mean, you got to go back, right? You got to go back to, you know, before the draft, and you know, there was some rumors and some mumblings, and then of course you and I got just completely all hook, line, and sinkered, thanks to our good friend Mike Gorman, on his infamous drive back from the draft party that night, following up the Ray Allen, you know, trade, and you and I just saying, you know, it doesn't make sense. How is this possible? What is going on? Two guards, you're going to have Pierce and Ray Allen? Of course, nowadays, that's like magic, you know, but in 2008, 2007, 2008, that's the lunacy. You need a big, right? And, you know, and he's like, you know, I think there's another shoe to drop, and that fueled shows for another 4 weeks, you know, as you and I went through the July, usually a quiet time, and there were peaks and valleys in that, you know, there was, you know, no way KG's looking at Boston because he's looking at LA, and then Phoenix got in the mix somehow, and, you know, and then, you know, who knew? Who would have thunk? We're sitting there. I'm coming back from vacation.
Was almost the guy too.
Sean Marion was
we almost wound up with Sean Marion instead.
Yes. I mean, it just, you know, there was a lot of emotion through that, and, you know, I wouldn't say it's comparable to what happened with the Gordon Hayward situation. That was a bit of a different scenario, just because of how long it took for this to play out, and it seemed so desperate because,
well, you know what? Let me jump in real quick on that, because the way that the world is now versus the way that the world was then with Twitter and breaking news and everything. Kevin Garnett rumors had been out there for 2 years. But they were all sort of, I used to get emails on my blog or messages from my blog, and people would tell me that, and nobody took any sources from the internet media as legit whatsoever. And I think I've told this story before, but I posted a year ahead of time, the Celtics are going to acquire Kevin Garnett. Of course, it was 12 months premature, and nowadays we would sort of dismiss it like that. Of course, everybody talks. Everybody's always talking. But back then, you know, it was totally different. Now you flash forward to your analogy or your comparison with Gordon Hayward, and that kind of was not necessarily a rumor, but it was almost the worst kept. It was a secret because he hadn't made his decision, but it was like so inevitable. We all just kind of waited for it to happen over the course of those 2 years. And so I think the biggest difference is it really was a surprise, even though Sean Grandy was kind of alluding to it. You mentioned the other shoe to drop with Gorman, like all of that. And And at the same time, it still felt like a gigantic surprise. Gordon Hayward didn't feel like a surprise. It felt like that was what was supposed to happen.
And you know what's interesting is there's so many folks that are listening to our show here, and they were kids, literally children, when we were broadcasting, making up a show. Maybe they were listening.
Jared
Probably
Weiss
they
was
were
in
not.
high school, bro.
Jared Weiss was, yes, he was riding his big wheels.
Bobby Manning may or may not have still been in diapers. No, obviously not, but.
No. Literally, Bobby Manning may have been riding a big wheel at that time. If big wheels actually existed, Power Wheels perhaps, but not a big wheel. That's only for us old heads like you and I. But yeah, I mean, this is a decade ago, 10 years ago, right? My son is going to be 11 here, I mean, this is, he was just turning 1, turning at that time, it's just like he's in middle school, right? I mean, that's how long ago this is. You look at some of the pictures of the guys now.
My daughter wasn't even born yet.
Right.
My youngest daughter had not even been born.
It's bizarre how long ago this is. And, you look at that and it's amazing because the distance, like the difference in how the Celtics organization is looked at now versus then, there was a die-hard group of us that were, certainly Jeff Clark and John Corrales and you and I and JB but it was a small community of people, really. There was
and most
real
people
GM.
Were trashing Danny Ainge.
Absolutely.
Like, since he traded Antoine Walker, just trashing him.
And Antoine wasn't wildly popular. I was not a fan of Antoine's personally, but you're absolutely right. He was a very divisive figure. And the moment he got sent out of town, a lot of people just said, nope, Danny doesn't
but
know.
But it was Rafe LaFrentz. It was before people on the interwebs understood the cap at all. Look at all the cap experts we have on Twitter and how educated the casual fan can be regarding the finances, the financial parameters and implications of doing a deal in today's NBA. And that was really what it was. Yeah, they got an expiring contract. They got, Rafe LaFrentz, blah, blah, blah. But everybody was pissed. And really all Danny was doing was setting them up so that they could make the right kind of deals. And they got a first round pick out of that. Who was it? Tony Allen wound up being the pick?
The Rafe LaFrentz deal?
Yeah, I think so.
I thought it was Delonte, but
it
was
one
of the
Delonte.
two because they were back to back there in 04. Yep. But you're right. Yeah, it was all prelude. And for that matter, a lot of criticism, people were looking at the trade this year of the number 1 pick for Tatum and the future pick there, saying, well, the last time Danny had a bad trade, like when was that? And some said Jeff Green. And other folks were saying, well, he did that Timberwolves deal to get Telfair. But they forget that the Telfair deal also included Theo Ratliff. So without Ratliff, you don't have the matching salaries to be able to get KG. So, it's kind of funny. You look at these, it looks like a bad deal on the surface, but over the long haul, and a lot of these deals that Danny does seem to fall out that way. The Rondo deal, killed the Rondo deal, hated it. Gee, now how does it look? I mean, on and on and on, you look at these situations. I think the Perk deal is probably one where we look back and say, well, it didn't work out. They had a good team at the time. But Perk was walking at the end of that year no matter what. They weren't going to re-sign him. And instead they got a younger player back who could play maybe that small ball 4. Of course, it was Jeff Green.
Well,
so
and let's add
that didn't work out.
The worst deal that had happened in recent history was the trade for Vin Baker. And Danny got us out of that. So that right there should have been the telltale sign. Like the team figure out a way out of that, then you gotta give them mad props. You have to be a little bit lenient because Vin's contract was going to be an anchor for a long time on this franchise.
Brutal. Yeah. And so we looked at that early part of the year. Let's say that 03 to 06 run that, when, a lot of us were on message boards, on blogs. It was a small, dedicated, hardcore group that loved this team through and through, loved the development of the players, really loved Al Jefferson, Delonte, Ryan Gomes, Tony Allen. I mean, the list, Gerald Green, the list went on, and we were enthralled with this, what was happening, this internal development that was happening on that roster. But the thing is they weren't very good. They weren't good teams. They were peaks and valleys of, when Antoine came back, they had a nice little run. They had a nice run, obviously, just at that Pierce Antoine year in 2002. But that was about it, going back to the Bird era. It had been so long since this team was legitimately a contender. I don't care if they were in the Eastern Conference Finals 2002. That was a team that was never going to go. I mean, that wasn't going to happen that year. And that KG deal, it just changed. It changed the franchise. And when I've seen some of the posts today, people put together, Ben Rohrbach from Ball Don't Lie, saying things like, it changed the way, Danny's saying, it changed the way that young players looked at the Celtics. For us old heads, we remember Bird, we remember Russ, Parrish and McHale and the big three, and we remember those days. But the guys who were playing, in 07, 08, they didn't have any sort of, experience. But now, look at it now, 10 years later, guys like Gordon Hayward, 10 years ago, he was 17. Horford was a rookie coming in. So their experiences are that the Boston Celtics are not just a relevant franchise, but are a true championship contender.
The Celtics dancers had barely even been around. And there are people that never really saw Red Auerbach do an interview.
That's right. Yeah.
That's the kind of distance we're talking about with the last decade. That's crazy.
It is.
Because anybody before that knew Red Auerbach and at least had seen him smoke a cigar once.
Right. His health hadn't been great, the last couple of years. The 04, 05, 06, we saw him next to never. He had, in that 02 Jim O'Brien era, there was, you'd see him here and there. But he was certainly elderly and getting up there in age. But 08 that's 6 years after that 02 run. Things, or I guess let's say 07, because things were just very dire at that circumstance. Yeah, Pierce, who was apparently looking to get out of there if things didn't dramatically change. You had that incredible 18-game losing streak punctuated by Tony Allen blowing out his ACL. But on the other hand, you also had Al Jefferson making some strides, Delonte making strides. So there was positive, even in as bad as that 07 season was, there was positivity. And of course, a lot of us, and I remember you and I talking about it, and JB talking about it on the show, Oden or Durant. And of course, things going so badly in that draft lottery. But we never would have thought from that night, after that draft lottery and us being so down in the depths, I mean, really despondent stuff. Worse than a few years ago when they lost. It was the worst moment, probably, right there. That was the ebb of the whole thing. And to go from there to roughly, 10 weeks later, being far and away the most talented team in the NBA. That's a wild ride, man.
Yeah, it's a totally wild ride. And real quick, I'm just going to do a station identification. Follow Celtic Stuff Live on Twitter at CSL_tweet live, as well as your host. Follow me at CSL_Justin. John is at CSL_Duke, and the entire CLNS Media Network at CLNS Media. The Facebook page is facebook.com/CLNS fans, and you can download the CLNS Media app for iOS and Android. Simply search CLNS Media in your app marketplace. The YouTube channel is blowing up. YouTube.com/CLNS Media for high definition, full length locker room interviews, the Garden Report, the Round Table, the banners broadcast. There's so much video going on. I know we promised our listeners video a few shows ago, and it is coming. Just sit tight. It's on its way.
You all want to see our faces.
I know they're just clamoring. They're just clamoring for yes. Jon and Justin's or the Jug head and the Dad head, yes. and the
yes.
Duke head. I guess.
You kid.
We never got it. How in 15 years have we not spun the head moniker somehow in your direction? That's weird. I'm not sure it's a moniker.
I think
I'm
careful dodging on my part, probably.
Today. Yeah.
That's right.
I'm just destroying it. I'm shredding it today. That's great.
Shredding it. Yeah, absolutely killing it. It's great. All these podcasts are out there now. Hey, Justin, how many podcasts were there when we were broadcasting in the
as far as Celtics go? There was none.
There were other than
us. Yeah, but there really weren't that many podcasts, and I'm not even sure that we can call ourselves a podcast at that time. We did make it available for download, so in that sense it was a podcast, but we really did a live show, and how much equipment? You remember the live draft night show? I probably had 5 pieces of equipment, 2 computers. We had to have a TV so that we could see what was happening. You couldn't watch it on your phone. I mean, think about that. If you're one of the younger generation listening to this right now, and boy do I sound super freaking old right now. But like when we do a draft show now, I just plug in my headset and I go pull up the ESPN app, or I think that's where the draft is held on, or whatever it is, and I just watch it on my phone, muted, while we do the show and watch the draft. And just 10 years ago, we had to have 5 different pieces of equipment, 2 computers. I think I used Vonage, and we had a phone coupler that would run the 1-800 line in, and we did a live show. It's crazy how much has changed in just a decade. But I guess if you're lucky, you still only live 8 decades, John, so maybe that puts it back in context for us.
It puts it in context, and now we can just about do a whole show on a phone. So that's where we are. We've gone from 5 pieces of equipment to one we carry around with us every day.
5 pieces of equipment and 2 computers.
Right, 2 computers.
To essentially a phone.
Basically, this is like those old pictures you see of guys going into a big lab in the 60s to get a punch card that says, hello. Basically, nobody knows what we just sound like to the right now,
but me.
Oh my gosh!
Maybe our buddy Lance G and some of the longtime listeners know what you're talking about. But punch cards and what?
What's a punch card, man?
What's a vinyl record, John?
Oh my gosh! Yeah, I know.
8-track.
I know.
Boom, go 8-track.
Well, I don't know if you saw Chad Finn. Did you see what Chad Finn's response to Chad Finn, longtime guest on the show, and Mainer at heart, and still actually a Mainer, but obviously works for the Boston Globe. He tweeted, responded to my comment that we were recording this show, and said, didn't you record those on cassette tapes? That's how old we are. One, we know what a cassette is.
Dude. It was about the same time, Chad, thank you for the comment, but it was around the same time you made a mixtape by waiting for the radio to play the song that you liked, and then you hit record, and then you waited again, and you would call in and make your request, shout it out to your girlfriend on the radio, and then try to record it on a tape as you're putting together a mixtape. You remember doing that?
I can neither confirm nor deny any of those things.
Yeah, you totally did that.
I
know for a fact you've been with your wife for a very long time.
Yes.
You can't. What's the over under? If we were to take a bet today on the number of times you called into a radio station to dedicate a song to your wife, right? This is something nobody even knows about anymore. No, what is the over under? 12. I'll set the line at 12. Am I close?
Well, okay. First of all, there's a couple complicating factors in this. One, I was a mixtape guru. I don't really brag about that much nowadays, but we really relied on the mixtapes that I provided. So there we got that. 2, my wife was a big fan of Delilah. And for anyone who knows who Delilah is, do you remember Delilah?
I actually don't. which now I feel like not only am I lame because I'm 42 years old reminiscing about tapes, but I now feel lame because 30 some odd years ago I don't remember Delilah. So now
Delilah,
for shame.
Delilah, she was a national radio host who did evenings, and she was broadcast all around the country on for those in northern New England, WHOM 94.9.
Don't you mean Elvira?
No. Delilah looks very different, but she'd have all these heartwarming sob stories, and I just never had the heart to try to call in. But if I had, I totally would have been in like Flynn in that scenario because she was a big fan. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. I don't think KG ever called in Delilah. I'm pretty certain about that.
No, and if he did, it would have sounded like raw, and it would not have fit whatsoever. All right, real quick. We're going to tell everybody about ZipRecruiter, and then we're going to come back and talk about Kyrie Irving, because I think we need to segue back into today and the reality and the drama that is the Cleveland Cavaliers right now. But first, it's the off season and teams are finalizing their rosters for next year. Having the right players on the court will be the key to success. That sharp outside shooter or power rebounder can be the difference between winning and losing. Business isn't any different. Your company needs the right people to be the best. So where do you go to find the top talent? You're not going to find the right candidates by posting your job on just one site. You need to post on all the top job sites, and now you can with ZipRecruiter. At ZipRecruiter.com, you can post your job to 100 plus job sites with one click, and then their powerful technology efficiently matches the right people to your position. That's why ZipRecruiter is different. Unlike other job sites, ZipRecruiter doesn't depend on candidates finding you. It finds them for you. In fact, over 80% of jobs posted on ZipRecruiter get a qualified candidate in just 24 hours. No more juggling emails or calls into the office. Simply screen, rate, and manage candidates all in one place with ZipRecruiter's easy-to-use dashboard. Find out today why ZipRecruiter has been used by businesses of all sizes nationwide. And right now, our listeners can start forming their own winning team on ZipRecruiter for free. Just go to ZipRecruiter.com/sportsfan. That's ZipRecruiter.com/sportsfan to try it for free today. John, are you ready to move on to Kyrie, or did I cut off our reminiscing and throwback conversation a little too close?
Well, maybe just a couple quick points before we talk about maybe today's NBA. But I think that there's really, when we were doing this, we were very bullish. I think somewhat hesitant, knowing that they didn't have a bench, knowing that there was a lot of pieces that, could you win with only three guys? Now, of course, it started a whole era of things, although not in the way that LeBron did it. Let's be very clear about this. But, we walked in, we had Pierce, we had Rondo, we had KG, and we had Ray Allen and Perk. And that was about it. And Danny Ainge did the work to fill out that bench, but he had the talent with which to draw players to Boston. And I remember, Bob Ryan, our fellow CLNS media host. Can you believe that? Well, I passed him in the break room the other day.
Crazy.
And, yeah, it's wild.
Passed him I totally went up totally nerdy at the water cooler.
Yeah, I know. I was like, hey, how's it going, Bob? Remember that time in '86 when Bird shot left-handed? And then it was 4 hours later. We didn't get any work done the rest of the day. The TPS reports were totally piling up for Nick. Anyway, Bob was really concerned about that and, said, well, they're going to, bottom half of the East. Well, history was made that night. They certainly were able to do what needed to be done and showed the way that you build a team from there on out. And now we're kind of entering that next era where I think that they are they now again setting a new stone, a new mark, a new map, to show the way in which how you can build on two different tracks. You build for now, you build for the future. And yes, that's something that San Antonio is doing and has been doing, but not in this way, not in such an obvious way. That San Antonio has found role players through that way. They've found players who starred and then go on elsewhere, Dwayne Dedmans of the world and Tago Splitters and so forth. But this is if this works, if what Danny does here works, I would be almost assured that the teams that are kind of tanking right now, they're looking at what Boston's doing, and they're going to be trying to do the exact same thing here in 2020, 2021. And I don't know how they can do it because they don't have the other part of the KG trade, which is his trade out, which brought the 3 draft picks, the 3 Nets picks, and all that this has set up for this era. It was a life-changing moment on July 31st, 2007, and I will remember it certainly forever as one of the greatest moments as a sports fan, and watching that deal happen and the euphoria that lasted for years and years after.
It was basically a real GM trade proposal gone real world, right? Like, this was the kind of stuff that people would throw in one of those forums and everybody would laugh and mock them. And then it happened. And that's what was so bizarre about it. And you just teed it up really nicely talking about how could anybody wind up positioning themselves the same way as the Celtics have right now. But also, what did we just talk about? Like, you never know what's going to happen with injuries. You never know what's going to happen with a team. It can blow up. You should always be trying to battle for number 1 anyway. And then the whole Kyrie Irving situation actually opens the door for the Celtics to repeat as the first seed in the East. Although, as we also talk about trade scenarios and trade machine proposals that are just like completely outlandish. The one thing I will say about the trade machine that we didn't have back in the real GM proposal days is at least there's a way to keep it financially reasonable. Like, some of the proposals out there were like, dude, the money just doesn't work. At least now we gotta get everybody in check and put them through the trade machine. But there's a lot of wacky, wild proposals, for how Cleveland would fire sale on Kyrie Irving. And to be honest with you, John, there's no need to fire sale. If they can't get something reasonable, I understand they're not going to get, true value on the dollar most likely because it got out there just the same way it did with Paul George. And I don't think that they got, dollar for dollar value there either for the Pacers. But fire sale, I don't think so. I think that they could make it work during the regular season and just trudge through it until they find something that makes sense. This is the worst time of the year to be trying to make a trade. Everybody's sort of like kind of set themselves up financially for the start of the year. I'm not saying it's impossible, but I don't see fire sale, and I don't see why the Cavs organization should feel. It seems like there's a lot of pressure, but as a matter of fact, there's enough has changed there that I think they can kind of sit back and make sure they do the right thing. Otherwise, they risk the chance of really just closing the door on the LeBron James second round era in Cleveland as well. Because if they don't do it the right way, he's already kind of intimated that he's leaving. He'll definitely be leaving if they don't make the right deal here.
Well, I think I'd love to say that I think that would happen because I think it does make the East a bit more. I think you're going to have one more run, but LeBron's gone, and I think that this is Kyrie trying to assert himself, and not trying to be, basically taking whatever LeBron wants, and that's what this whole thing I think is about. Is that he's been forced to subjugate to LeBron since basically ever since LeBron decided to grace Cleveland with his presence once again.
Yeah, you're right. He was supposed to be the heir apparent.
He was.
And then all of a sudden, he was kind of the bitch. And you know what else? Like, why doesn't Cleveland consider trading LeBron? I mean, I understand the hit, but that's exactly what Danny Ainge would have done potentially, right? I mean, it's a hard move, but think about the picks. Think about the players, and you keep Kyrie and you keep Love. Of course, they're still going to be competitive.
I'm not sure how competitive.
Not
I mean,
top
they'll be
of
good.
the East, but they would be competitive.
But I wonder if the damage is already done. Look, the organization itself is a complete disaster. You know, when you can't hold on to your GM in a situation where they are right now, you know, guy who wins wins the championship, has a team that builds a team that goes to 3 straight finals, you know, puts the team in a position to get LeBron to begin with, you know, and then to cut that loose. And I think that there's a lot of instability and unhappiness with the direction from the ownership there. So I completely understand why Kyrie wants out. I mean, the fact that he's not even talking to anybody, not the Cavs, not LeBron, and you know, if you believe, you know, the videos from Harrison Barnes' wedding this past weekend, where Steph Curry is you know, basically, you know, making LeBron's workout video look foolish, and Kyrie's standing on the side laughing his head off. I mean, that's not a good sign. I don't think that they can come back with that. I think they have to move him. And I think they can get a good package, but as you said, they're not going to get dollar for dollar. There's just no way that they'll be able to get dollar for dollar at this point. And I don't understand why they didn't make a move sooner in free agency. You know, they've known since right before the deadline, or, you know, the start of free agency, that he was not coming, that he wanted out. So why wait this long? You know, and for that matter, why not? I guess they had tried to make the deal for Paul George, and Indiana was balking at the inclusion of Kyrie. So there's a lot of questionable things in terms of what's going on. But I think Cleveland's put themselves in this scenario, and they may try to force him to come back to training camp, but I think that's only going to hurt the value more. It's a shame for Cleveland's sake, but for Boston's sake, it's the best possible scenario, because it does open that window just a little bit further, and you get an extra year where probably you thought, you know, they weren't going to be competitive, or maybe even not competitive, but maybe not possibly have a real legitimate chance to knock off Cleveland Cavaliers. And I think they absolutely do that. And it's kind of interesting in the parallels with KG, because I think a lot of us looked at the Detroit Pistons coming into that year of 2008 thinking, oh, the Pistons are going to be world beaters. They're going to be tough to beat. They're going to be hard to get through. And it was probably the most anticlimactic of the series that the Celtics played in 2008 was against the Pistons. They did beat them once at the Garden, but other than that, really, the Celtics had control of that series from the jump. And I wouldn't be surprised if Cleveland kind of walks away. We've seen that when LeBron has one eye out the door, he does not give the same effort as he does with the LeBron that we're used to for all those years. We all remember the way he basically walked with his tail between his legs in that Cleveland series in 2010. And I would be surprised to see that again this year.
That fan base, this is all they got. I mean, they are so grappled onto this. And the fact that they could lose Kyrie and LeBron and get stuck with Kevin Love. I know that sounded horrible, but it's not really stuck with Kevin Love. But honestly, but think about that. In just a matter of 2 years from having gone serious, crazy comeback against a super team that got even more super the next year, and then just a little over 2 years after that, they become almost irrelevant in the East. That would be a horrendous swing. So I guess it depends on what you get back for Kyrie and how they build and all. You know, there's still a lot of different factors there, but in my opinion, if you're pretty certain that LeBron's not coming back and you've got to trade Kyrie and you're not going to get a stud back for Kyrie, at that point, why don't you fire sale it? The whole mediocrity piece is, as we know, it's the worst place to be. They got a new GM. He can just put a whole new stamp on it. But the problem is the fans will never forgive him for trading LeBron, and they'll never convince the fan base that it needed to be done. Never. It'll always be the first time he left us. They'll never rationalize it to say, he left us last time, why wouldn't he leave us again? Let's get something this time. right? They'll never rationalize it that way.
No. I don't understand why it is that they don't. I mean, maybe the fact that it is Cleveland and it's the home city and all those things, but God, it would put them in a much better position post LeBron to be able to begin to. I mean, they were left with nothing in 2010, 2011. There was nothing. The cupboard was bare.
Anderson Bergeau. Hold on, come on. Let's give it for,
right.
Sideshow Bob.
Yeah.
He was going to carry them through the transition, right? The rebuild.
Yeah.
Did they have Z? They had Zydrunas Ilgauskas then still, too,
I think,
right?
Yeah, he was still there. I think. I know he had the back thing. I'm not sure when that really kind of kicked up, but yeah, he was absolutely, in a spot where, he hadn't, I think he hadn't left at that point. And so you had all these like high ticket players, but nobody who could score the ball. It was a lot of Mo Williams. I remember that. And that's
right.
Remember, I'm not a fan of Mo Williams. No, front running turd, Mo Williams.
Front running turd. Is that the first guy to get front running turd status on this show?
Yes.
Mo Williams was the original Celtic Stuff Live front running turd. Interesting. Yes. That's a good memory. I would not, now that you say it, I remember it was Mo, but if you had asked me who was the original, who was the OG turd, I would not have remembered.
I mean, certainly there are legendary front running turds that go back into the annals of history, but in terms of this show, I believe Mo Williams was the inaugural individual to really begin that very important position as front running turd du jour. So
yeah. Oh boy. All right. We've got about, I don't know, maybe 6 minutes left in the show. We've got to talk about a couple of wrap-up signings as we look ahead to training camp. Celtics signed Shane Larkin. He's been out of the league and overseas for a year. And wrap up some of their signings for their rookies. I believe they have, Bird is the only one that remains unsigned. They're going to be over the limit for training camp. They love to do that, create some competition, have them battle, and then somebody gets the axe, much the way that the debate last year kept us entertained as we looked at RJ Hunter versus James Young. So we'll have a similar debate, I guess, coming up.
Yeah, I think so. I think it will be probably between Theus, or I like to call him Tiffany Amber Thiessen, just because I think it's fun. Right?
See, this is throwback show because here we are going Saved by the Bell. And,
it's all right.
It's all right. Yep.
So we get Tiffany Amber Thiessen, we got Abdul Nader, and then Shane Larkin.
Abdul Ralph Nader. I mean, come on. This is just Shane. Don't call me Barry Larkin. Every single one of these is beautiful.
We get all of a sudden, who knew? Wait, is Chris Berman on the line? Chris? Hello? The Raiders. Okay. Anyway, look, I think that Larkin actually has a shot, honestly. He was probably the best free agent point guard in Europe. He had a $6 million contract kind of looking at him, and he went the other way and decided to come here for the minimum. I feel like the Celtics really like him. He's an undersized guard with ridiculous athleticism who can't make a shot. If he can make a shot, if he can figure out the 3-point ball, he could be a real player. I have no idea what Theus can do. I've seen him block shots. I've seen him hit threes, but I have no idea if that translates at all. And Nader, I think he would be, I wouldn't even question his role in this, other than the fact that the Celtics just have so many swing players at this time. He's just at a bit of a redundant position, but it could go any number of different ways. And I would say that the potential still exists as a trade. I think that's why they add this 16th guy. if there's a trade or there's a major injury, this isn't about, IT, I don't believe. I think it's just a question of they have options and they've got 16 NBA players who they can work with. And if there is a trade or a 2-for-1 or a 3-for, they've got someone who they can plug and play, ready to fit into the system, and it doesn't hurt their cap at all. So it just makes a ton of sense.
Yeah, it definitely does. And it's just the way that they do things every single year. You've got to go in. The other thing that was kind of interesting too, as we talk about some of these newer, younger players in competition in camp, was interesting to see Semi Ojeleye and Gordon Hayward hanging out, wasn't it?
Yeah, the good call. Yeah, that was interesting. And I think that's a good sign to see the new guy taking the rook under his wing. I liked that a lot.
Yeah, I don't know, it kind of goes into that whole rotation potential, right? Like all we've talked about is Marcus Morris and, Baines and figuring out all of that. And you know what? Also, as it relates to Shane Larkin, John, we talked about it before the show, but didn't get to it. We just kind of skipped over it, but I've been kind of talking about how IT's hip is lingering, yada, yada, yada.
Yep.
Start out the year, there's not a lot of ball handlers. We've already talked about it. Marcus Smart obviously would be, but then coming off the bench, who really at the guard position, Terry Rozier is not a ball handler. Demetrius Jackson is gone, which is why we thought that was so curious. And so then they go after Shane Larkin. So maybe that kind of explains it, a little bit of Isaiah Thomas insurance there.
Very, very possibly. I think that can't help but put the Celtics in a spot where they're not left hanging. But this IT thing, you've talked a lot about it, both on the show and in Twitter back and forth. I'm concerned about the hip. You've made me concerned. No surgery means that he's got to play with this. So you wonder if the new strength and conditioning staff is going to be prepared to try to manage that through the rest of his career. But for a guy that's on the precipice of a 9-figure contract here in July, that's a year from now. That's a big gamble. And it makes you wonder if it does impact his contract at all. And it makes you wonder how much of this new sports medicine focus that the Celtics are going to have here as they enter this season, how that will be impacted by, in particular, it's their best player.
Well, this isn't going to be the first time we talk about it because we're hitting the dry season, right? This is where you and I try to get to training camp. Thank goodness it is starting a little earlier this year, right? So it'll be a little bit shorter. It'll start a little bit earlier. That'll be nice for us. So I think we're going to switch to an every other week format. I guarantee you Isaiah Thomas's hip is going to be a common theme on pretty much every one of those shows, as well as who's going to start, rotations. There'll be some debate that way. Would love to get some questions for the show via Twitter. So don't forget at CSL_Justin, the show at CSL_TweetLive, and John at CSL_Duke. But yeah, John, I'm a little nervous, and it's a good point about Larkin because there really are not a lot of guys on this team that can initiate the offense. As a matter of fact, Bradley was somebody that they utilized every once in a while.
I think maybe the addition of Gordon Hayward will help that. I think he's a guy who's going to be running a lot of the offense, and I think we're going to see a lot more untraditional lineups. So we saw Kevin O'Connor wrote a great piece about that in the Ringer today. I think we're going to see a lot of that, but you need guys with that size. And the Celtics, while they were so small, they're actually now so overstocked perhaps on the wing that adding guys at either end of the spectrum, the bigs and the points, point guards, that's really where the areas of need are at this point.
Yep, it totally is. And we'll break that down a little bit on the next show as well, but that's going to do it for this week. The broadcast will be available on demand on the CLNS Media mobile app. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter at CSL_Justin, at CSL_Duke. A heartfelt thank you to everybody for tuning in. And remember, you can support the show by subscribing to Celtics Stuff Live on iTunes and Stitcher. We'd love it if you gave us a rating and a review because your feedback is important to the show. And a quick reminder that today's show brought to you by ZipRecruiter.com. Not only do they have a great deal for all of you listeners, but you would be supporting our show and the entire network. For staff writer Samuel Elias, executive producer Larry H. Russell, the founder of CLNS Media, Nick Gelso, and my co-host John Duke, I'm Justin Poulin. Thank you for listening to this week's edition of Celtics
Stuff Live.